Welcome to Amp Life, the #1 podcast for amputees, hosted by an amputee, and brought to you by Delatory Orthotics and Prosthetics, located in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. I'm the Brian Moe, the social media advisor for Delatory, and I also happen to be a below-knee amputee. Let's get into today's episode. How's it going, everyone? My guest today is the founder and CEO of Ability Prosthetics and Orthotics, the co-founder and president of Kinetic Revolutions, and a certified prosthetist and orthotist, Jeff Brandt. Jeff, welcome to Amp Life.
Thank you, Brian. It's great to be here. Appreciate you having me.
Absolutely. Tell me a little bit about your background. When did you decide to pursue a career in the O&P industry?
Yes. So back in 1993, probably 92, 93 timeframe, I was a sophomore at Penn State, and I was trying to determine what type of career to pursue within the healthcare field. And so I had an uncle who was in the industry, who I hadn't really grown up knowing very much or very well. He was on the West Coast, and so I called him up, and he sent me a couple of journals/magazines about the profession, and I took a look at those, and then I went to a local facility outside of the State College, Pennsylvania, and volunteered one summer. And I was hooked 5 minutes after volunteering, and knew this was exactly kind of how I wanted to spend my time and make it my life's work.
So at what point in your journey did you realize you wanted to start your own company rather than just working for someone else?
So, as your listeners may know, or you may know, orthotics and prosthetics is largely what we would call a cottage industry or a mom and pop type atmosphere or profession where, back then in the early to mid 90s, we were just starting to think about sanctifying our educational requirements, and we had just gone from an associate's degree requirement to a bachelor's, and folks in the profession were pushing to go from bachelor's to master's. We were increasing the requirements for the residency part of the education to make sure we had one year of residency in orthotics and 1 year residency in prosthetics. And even the bachelor's level school programs at that time were even evolving. And so for me, going to school in 1999 at Northwestern, I come out of school and with very, very charged up and revved up, and empowered to keep pulling the professionalism, if you will, along and put a little more science and not as much art. I mean, we always say it's kind of a mix of art and science, and I think the field had its run already in the art side of it, or the more, not that we can't be creative and artistic and think in the abstract, but
right.
We kind of we're moving from art to science is my point. And so for me, right around 2000, coming out of school and pursuing 2 residencies, I was faced with a lot of sort of old school ways of doing things. And you asked why, and I was expecting a more quantifiable answer, and I would get, because we've always done it that way, kind of response. So for me, nothing against that, because I think there's really critical learning tools in steeped in the old way of doing things. There's mistakes to be avoided, right? So you want to learn, but at the same time, I always leaned forward and was always kind of pressing the envelope in terms of, can't wait to hurry up and get my residencies done, soak up as much knowledge as I can. And then I worked for another company for 1.5 years after finishing the residencies. And I just said, you know what, it's 2004. I've got an opportunity to rent a small office space in Gettysburg, Pennsylvania. I'm going to do this because if I'm going to fail, so to speak, I want to fail now, and I want to fail quickly so I can move on.
Right. So you founded Ability in 2004. When you founded the company, how did you hope that you would be able to impact the limb loss community?
Right. So some of the founding principles at Ability were, when I went into it, it was, I wanted to be able to provide folks with, I would say my leading thought was awareness and education, even above clinical care, right? It was, how do we make more people aware that this is a profession, that it's substantial in skill and knowledge and mastery, and that, we play a critical role in folks' mobility and getting them back to living, working, and enjoying family. And so mobility, in my opinion, does matter. Independence, freedom. And so for me, awareness and education were pretty much the founding principles, but also taking, I think when anybody goes into business, you think you can do it quicker, faster, better, right? And you build a better mousetrap. And for me, those things were centered around education. They were centered around the facilities that I was going to open, and I wanted them to present the profession in a certain way. The types of practitioners I was going to hire, or at the time it was just me. So it was, making sure the practitioner was well trained and formally trained and had done residencies. And so it was really about providing the amputee a different and better experience. And for the costs of a lot of these limbs and devices, there's no reason why you shouldn't be able to spend 3 hours during a fitting of a limb versus, during my residency, there were facility owners that would say, you need to be in and out of the room in 20 minutes. And I would say, well, yeah, but it's a $30,000 limb. Can we give them, can I be in there an hour?
Right.
And maybe we even buy the family lunch. I mean, it was always felt like it was kind of done on a shoestring budget, and that never really checked out for me. It was kind of like, wow, if I went and bought a car, I feel like they would spend longer with me in the showroom on all the features and benefits of the car than I'm spending with my patients who are wearing a limb every day. So that was kind of what was pulling me into doing it.
Sure. So I already know the answer to this question. It's very obvious to me, but do you feel that you've accomplished what you've set out to do so far?
I think we're doing a good job. I think we're very grounded at ability. I'm very humbled to be doing what I'm doing on the scale that we're doing it. 13 and a half years later, I would say that we've been successful in proving out the model and our style of care and customer service. So yes, but I also think that we have still a lot to learn, and we put our pants on the same way everybody else does every day. And we have to remind ourselves of that we don't have all the answers. I'm not an amputee myself, so I can get really, really close to walking a day in an amputee or a brace wearer's shoes, but in the end, I don't wear one of those devices. So we've spent a lot of time in the last year working with our patients. We formed a patient advocacy council so that we could start to get some real candid and direct, deliberate feedback from patients. Because while we may have had most of the answers for the last 13 years, I also think that it's inevitable that you start to get a little tunnel vision, and we know this works for amputees, right? Because we've done it 1,000 times. And then, you look up and you go, wait a minute, this doesn't work for amputees because, they're not reading magazines anymore, right? And then you need to pivot and constantly be reinventing yourself. So it's very exciting to be and humbling to be in the position we're in.
Awesome. I left this out of my questions, but how many locations do you have now, and how many states are you in?
Right. So we are currently in 3 states. We're in Pennsylvania, Maryland, and North Carolina. We have 9 offices. We just opened the 9th office back in the spring in Rockville, Maryland, and we're planning a 10th office opening in around the August timeframe of this year, which will be in Limerick, Pennsylvania, which is a suburb office to Philadelphia, much like our Exton, Pennsylvania office. So we will be at 10 across 3 states. So it's very exciting.
That is absolutely exciting. Wow. Congratulations on that. Fantastic.
Thank you. And it really allows us to be, a bit more of a regional player, regional footprint. We've had patients that have transferred, we're kind of covering enough of a geographic area at this point that we're seeing some of the benefits of, patients, someone moves from the Philadelphia suburbs to Charlotte and wow, they didn't even have to switch O&P practices. So we've seen a lot of that, and that's been a neat benefit of expanding the footprint, and as well as establishing some protocols and some consistencies with insurance companies, payers that are paying for the patient's limbs and braces. Having somewhat of a larger footprint can also be beneficial there in terms of getting the payers comfortable with how we practice and the kinds of things we're doing to ensure that it's the right device for the patient and that they are using the device after the payer pays for it. So,
sure, absolutely,
it's been good.
Good. So I know that I know you're active in AOPA's Political Action Committee, which serves to address key legislative issues on Capitol Hill. You and I actually met for the first time at this year's AOPA Policy Forum in D.C. What do you believe are some of the biggest issues facing the orthotics and prosthetics industry?
Yes, we did have a chance to meet, and it was wonderful. While there just seems to be, there's a handful, and they all strike me. First, I just want to say they all strike me as pretty commonsensical was kind of the category heading I like to put on some of these bullet points that both you and I were lobbying for.
Right.
There is we need to improve the way Medicare views orthotics and prosthetics, and there's a few issues tied to specifically Medicare. As far as we need them to limit payments to only qualified, licensed, and accredited providers, right? That's something Congress was directed to do 17 years ago. And Medicare CMS never fully implemented that direction. So there's some things regarding just potential fraud and abuse that if we can limit payments on Medicare devices to just qualified, certified prosthetists, orthotists, we could clean up a fair portion of that. Also ensuring that our notes as prosthetists and orthotists are entered and accepted as part of the clinical record or the clinical documentation. So right now, if I fit a limb at ability and Medicare audits that case or that claim, if we send my clinical notes in, Medicare will ask for the physician notes, which they should, the referring physician notes.
Right.
But oftentimes those referring physician notes don't really go into great detail or enough detail to satisfy the medical necessity for a limb. Even though that you, me, and everybody else in the town would agree the patient needs a limb, oftentimes those details are spelled out in the prosthetist note. But Medicare will say, well, it's self-serving. Of course, you're going to write all that because, you're getting paid for the limb. So we're kind of like, look, well, but surgeons also write notes that lead to surgeries for patients too. And
right.
And they're not, there's ways to monitor or audit that. We're simply asking, allow our note to be included. So, anyway, that's a couple of the issues, separating orthotics and prosthetics from durable medical equipment, because as your listeners may or may not know, durable medical equipment is more like your retail type devices, more like canes, crutches, walkers, oxygen tanks, a hospital bed, things like that. If anybody's had the experience of caring for a loved one and you have, the hospital bed brought into your house, you're renting the bed and really, the gentleman or the lady who delivers the bed shows you how to work it. You sign a piece of paper and you leave. And 3 months later, if the patient passes away, they come and pick the bed up and clean it and take it to another house. So
right.
That is not the type of care that prosthetists and orthotists are providing. We're providing ongoing evaluation care and maintenance. So if you're an amputee or a brace wearer, you may have to come into the office at best every 6 months. At worst, you may be in every other week during an acute acute period of pain or a flare-up or something like this, you may require many visits additionally. So I think it's important that we keep pushing the separation of DME and O&P because there's a significant service component to the O&P side. I think we're starting to get some legislators to see that. We've been lobbying through AOPA, which is the American Association of Orthotics and Prosthetics. We've been lobbying through them for years, obviously, but in my impression, in the last 3 or 4 years, because we've been hitting on the same points consistently with oftentimes many of the same offices, the legislative assistants and many times the congressman or woman directly are really starting to become comfortable with the vernacular and how these issues affect their constituents back in their different districts. So, and I would add too, along with this has been in 2015, Medicare attempted to change the prosthetic policy for Medicare beneficiaries, and it was severe in that it intended, it was a draft policy, but Medicare nonetheless put it out there, and it would significantly limit the access to prosthetic devices for their beneficiaries. And this proposal was really, it's called a local coverage determination, or an LCD. And really there was quite an uprising by patients from this announcement, and Medicare delayed the implementation of it, but never officially rescinded it, and hasn't to date taken it off of their website. So, there's been a little bit of an outcry from that, or a lot, I should say, but in terms of eking over to private insurers who say, oh yeah, Medicare may be onto something here. We may have a way to limit even how much the insurers are paying for limbs and devices. So we're working on it's under a moratorium now, and we're working. Our association is working very closely with the folks at CMS with a work group that they've put together to really take a step back. Which is what we asked them to do, is take a step back and relook at how they came up with some of these medical necessity parameters, and with the hopes that we can help them rewrite this, because we think there are some changes that make sense, but by and large, this would pretty much push us back into the 1970s with regards to technology. So.
Yeah, absolutely.
Brian, those are just a few of the issues at hand.
Sure, absolutely. So the GOP-controlled Senate, as you know, they recently unveiled the Better Care Reconciliation Act of 2017, which they want to use to replace the Patient Protection and Affordable Care Act, which we commonly call Obamacare. How concerned are you with how the BCRA might affect consumers of O&P services?
Right. So it's a tough question. And here's the thing, right? So if under the current Obamacare or ACA Act, you had a lot of folks that were the recipients of insurance, right? Or made it more affordable through subsidies or through federal grants, what have you. But a lot of those folks, if those folks needed limbs, limbs were covered in the essential healthcare benefits package, right? So technically, folks that got insurance through the ACA had the benefit of getting a prosthetic limb or a brace, which is great. The problem was that we didn't see a lot of those folks in our offices because the deductibles tied to those plans were so high that, if you have a prosthetic limb and it's $6,000, $8,000, $10,000, $12,000, and you have a large deductible like $1,500 or $2,000 or even $5,000 type of deductible, those folks previously were either utilizing a really old limb that was probably tattered or dilapidated or broken or something, or never had a limb at all, which sounds crazy. But there are folks out there that aren't wearing prosthetics that could. those folks, we never saw an uptick in those folks coming in using their newly received insurance. So it'll be interesting under, the BCRA, obviously some people short term, I think the Congress and media types people are forecasting that people would be off the insurance pretty much immediately. And then you'd have to wait to see what the individual states would do regarding how they would start to fund Medicaid programs and to catch some of these folks or all of them, So, and it would be up to the states whether, how are they going to define that essential benefits package? I would hope that orthotics and prosthetics would always be included in some sort of whatever you define as essential benefits, right? It's hard to think for me that you could prioritize much above a leg or a brace, right?
Right.
And where food, shelter, water, prostheses, right? It's fourth. But there's other competing services in that definition of essential healthcare benefits that states may not know that they're prosthetics, orthotics. Let's pay for behavioral health, or I'm just picking names, but there's other services in there that I think it's important that we educate. If BCRA is passed, I think the whole profession needs to dive in really with their state legislators at that point and make sure that folks that need these services are going to be covered because that's going to be key then on a state level.
Absolutely. This year's policy forum was the first time since becoming an amputee that I've been on Capitol Hill, having the chance to lobby and meet in the various offices of representatives to Congress and advocating not only for myself, obviously, as an amputee, but also for other amputees. And, for me, it was a very cathartic experience, especially when I had the opportunity to sit in the office of my representative, Mike Kelly, and share not just the story of how I became an amputee, but also shared how the current healthcare law has actually helped me. How important is it, not just for those of us that are living with limb loss, but also for clinicians and others who work in O&P to reach out to the members of Congress who represent them to advocate for quality healthcare and improved healthcare laws as it pertains to O&P patients?
Brian, it's a great point, and it's super important. Again, this goes back to education and awareness, right? And education is power, and you got to try to seek out education and knowledge. And so anyone who is connected to an O&P practice or a patient or that wears a brace or a limb, a parent, a friend, second, third degree, it could be your neighbor, you just have to spread the word. It's somewhat guerrilla. It's somewhat, grassroots marketing kind of thing. But there are ways to just notify these congressmen and women. AOPA has ways to do it through auto-generated letters that, the public can just get on AOPA's website and enter in their zip code and fire off letters to their congressmen and women. So the Amputee Coalition of America has it's called Amplify Your Voice, or Amplify.
Amplify Yourself.
Which is Amplify Yourself. Thank you. And that's we had a demonstration on that resource a month ago, and our practitioners are now actively giving that to patients, and it's kind of a safe haven, if you will, place where patients can go and tell their insurance story. And really, the ACA, what they're doing is, they're building a database of really the color and context behind every one of these patients' strifes with either dealing with their insurance companies, and there's some positive stories on there as well. But it's a mix of just patients that are just simply trying to get a limb, and telling their story about 3, 6, 9 months to get authorization for a limb. And then they don't pay the provider in a timely manner and things like that. So those types of resources are the things we need to be showing to people, and making sure that we're constructive. We all get frustrated from time to time, for sure. Our patients, the most of anyone, but it's important that we keep educating people and get beyond the squeaky wheel gets the grease. We need to get to where the whole car gets the grease, right?
Right, absolutely. Absolutely. That's a very good way to put that. So one of the bills that we were advocating for while we were in D.C. At the policy forum, and you mentioned this a little bit earlier, the Medicare Orthotics and Prosthetics Improvement Act of 2017. And for anyone listening who's like me and likes to look these things up, it's Senate Bill 1191 and House Resolution 2599. You talked earlier about why this bill is important to the O&P industry, but how will this bill help ensure that patients continue to have access to quality prosthetics?
Right. So when you think about some of the aspects of this bill and how it ensures continued access to the quality, when you limit payments to only qualified providers, right? Well, in the last 17 years, we've done a really good job increasing and sanctifying our educational requirements. So now as we prepare for the future, and as we train budding clinicians coming out, we have you have more of a likelihood of walking into a facility that has a well-trained, formally trained practitioner with a set of protocols and outcomes that they're following. And to the degree that you can standardize a highly customized industry, right? Because if I were seeing you as my patient, the last thing I'm going to do is try to put you into a round or square hole, right? I'm going to listen to you, and I'm going to come up with a very customized treatment plan. But my approach to that should be somewhat standard and accepted through master's level degree training. So anyway, that's one way it ensures it ensures that you're going to have access to quality prosthetics. Some other, when you talk about training for these folks, right? The VA has an increasing population of folks that need these types of services as well. And, we're only graduating roughly 125 students annually. And it's a pretty low number. And, forecasts show that we're going to need about 325 students a year graduating. So we need to increase, obviously, the number of graduates. So
Right.
We need to expand programs. We need to create new programs. And we need to get some of those students spending more time in the VA so that we continue to increase the VA's competencies and awareness towards treating veterans. I mean, there was just a story out a couple weeks ago, I think it was in the New York Times, about, women veterans, female veterans are going to make up 20% of the veterans flowing through the service, through the VA hospital system in the coming years, right? So we still, I don't know about the practice that you visit, but we still have issues with, lack of really a nice cover for a prosthetic limb for a female. And not to say that males shouldn't have, not to say that a guy shouldn't have a nice looking cover either, but I think that we've stagnated a little bit there. And so when you talk about ensuring that Medicare patients have access to this kind of care, it also extends to, private insurers and the VA, because how Medicare goes is how the VA goes, and how the VA goes is how commercials go, and things like this. So they all look to each other for kind of what that standard is going to be.
Right.
And again, the more Medicare recognizes our notes as healthcare professionals and is willing to validate our notes and how we saw the patient, again, that ensures that through this bill that access to prosthetics for you would be, maintained at a certain level going forward.
So you mentioned the VA, and I know that you do a lot of work with the VA. You've testified before the House VA Subcommittee on Health. How have you been able to work to improve the relationship between the VA and the contracted O&P patient care centers that help veterans get a prosthesis that will best meet their needs?
Right. So I'll say I'm on the front end of that at this point. In the last 12 months, I've probably done more interacting with the VA than I have in the previous decade. So I've been watching and observing the VA for pretty much a decade, and have been a willing participant to service veterans for sure. Ability has, in full disclosure, we have VA contracts and we have practitioners in and out of VA hospitals treating veterans, and it's great. We have only recently, in the last year or so, started to really increase our efforts to see more veterans with a little larger coverage area, with a little better handle on outcome measures that we're able to use. We feel like we've got a nice confluence going on right now where we can kind of take, patient, practitioner, outcome, facility, and put it all together and get a treatment plan for the patient, for the veteran. So we've seen that work increase, and with that has come the opportunity to, like you said, testify and start to articulate, have a little bit of a conversation. There's been several prosthetic chiefs in our regions that I've spoken to. I've attended a VA. The VA does every year. They do a summit meeting, and a couple of years ago it was in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, and I attended that and was able to really sit down with folks. And again, it's a sort of one brick at a time on the wall. But we've put quite a few bricks up the last few years, and we hope that some of those relationships can lead to, more of a conveyance of what we're trying to do and why it's important for veterans. And in fact, there was just an article yesterday in the New York Times about how 2 veterans received a very advanced, complex artificial arm, a prosthetic arm, and the new secretary is very excited about making sure that veterans have access to advanced technology. And so as part of some of these relationships that we're working to develop, we have to solve this question of what's a fair reimbursement for these devices, and how is the VA going to approach paying for these devices? Because we bill through an L code system. It's L-CODE, L code, and that is outdated for the most part. And so a lot of the newer technologies that are available that can really help people function at a higher level, they don't fit into the old way of coding or billing for these devices. So I think where the VA has to really where we really want to gently lock together and figure this out and collaborate is how are they going to pay for these devices, and what outcome measures are we going to use to determine if the veteran even needs that device? Because I think that's the other side of this is there's such a media frenzy on, the veteran needs the best device out there, but how do we define best? Because
right.
Not every veteran is going to need what Fred Downs got in the New York Times article yesterday for 4th of July. Fred Downs is a former secretary of the VA, right? And he lost his arm in Vietnam. And, not everybody's going to warrant that kind of technology. And in fact, sometimes when we see veteran patients, we run them through a series of outcome protocols, and we're calling up the VA and saying, hey, I know you all wanted him to have the latest and greatest arm or the latest and greatest leg, but we don't think that he or she necessarily would utilize the features of that. So how about something less? And that's where I think it saves the taxpayer, saves some of those taxpayer dollars. And sometimes we're not always met with great. It's good that we're assigning the appropriate componentry to the patient's functional level. Sometimes it's met with, well, yes, I understand that you're saying he or she won't utilize it, but I want them to have the higher thing anyway, because I want to cover myself kind of an approach. And so, again, I think it works both ways, and what we all can do through growing a VA relationship is just increase the frequency at which we sit down and talk about this stuff, because I still maintain it's fairly commonsensical, and the technology is not going away, right? It's continuing to come. So, and for some it's not coming fast enough, and for others it's coming too fast, right? But we need to find somewhere in the middle where both sides can make hay, and the patient is not excluded from that equation by any means.
Absolutely. So I want to switch gears here just a little bit. You are the co-founder of Kinetic Revolutions. Tell me, how did this company come to be?
Right. So Kinetic Revolutions, this is sort of the brainchild of when I first started Ability. I was driving quite a bit on the Pennsylvania Turnpike, of all places, and I was spending hours in my car. And I have a good friend from both high school and college who lives on the West Coast. And when you leave Gettysburg at 6 o'clock, or I should say 7, and you've got a 2-hour drive ahead of you at 7 o'clock Eastern, your good friend on the West Coast, it's 4 o'clock, and he's becoming even more available for a call during his commute home. So we were chatting it up there for a spell, and he has an MBA and supply chain background and things, and we were strategizing that, in the orthotics and prosthetics profession, what I have seen is a lot of one-off solutions that practitioners come up with at the bench, so to speak, in the labs of their respective offices. There's always a challenging problem, and as prosthetists and orthotists, we're problem solvers. That's probably one of our, I think, our greatest or most valuable character attributes, is that we're trying to solve things for people, and we enjoy that. And many times we're successful. So we were talking about that there's got to be one-off solutions that people have come up with over the years in their back labs, and they never really get out of the back lab. And maybe there's 1,000 other facilities that could benefit from that idea. So the idea was born that we would start Kinetic Revolutions, and it would be a small product development company. We called it Big R, Little D, which is, Little R, Big D. So little research, big development. And one of the first products was, an adjustable pylon that myself and Jeff Brandt, my partner in Ability and also in Kinetic, had for years of, why wasn't there a component for definitive or permanent use in a prosthetic limb that would allow the patient, the prosthetist, the PT, whoever really, provided they were tightening it back to the proper specs, but would allow the patient to change the height of the artificial limb. And sometimes the height only needs to be changed by, a 1/16th of an inch or an 1/8 of an inch. And so, a lot of times when we're fitting these limbs, especially in the acute phases, a month after an amputation, you can have a patient in your office, you fit the limb, you assess the height of the prostheses, and everybody, including the patient, says it feels good, it feels like the right height. You're double checking their pelvis, you're taking all your steps to ensure that it's okay. And then 24 hours later, while the patient's at therapy, you get a call from the therapist, and it's a pleasant call, and it just says, hey, Brian's telling me the limb is a 1/4 inch too tall. And then the conversation that ensues is usually like, oh, it's impossible. I just checked it yesterday. And anyway, now you can kind of say, well, let's loosen the set screw, and this pylon revolves. So you just, you spin it, it's a 1/16th of an inch in height change per revolution. So you could just turn the pylon, and it will lengthen or shorten to the height that you desire, and then tighten the set screw back to 10 Newton meters and have the patient stand up. And so it was, for us, just always sort of dancing around in our heads. And Jeff Culette and I have been in many hallways of nursing homes and skilled nursing facilities and rehab hospitals, and, cutting through, the old way to do it is have this pylon and you're cutting through it a hacksaw, or you've got a pipe cutter that you're spinning 42 times to cut through a pylon. And so we basically took an adjustment that usually takes about 14 minutes from what we calculated, and it takes it down to 8 seconds. So we said, well, we have something here. Let's let this be the first product that Kinetic brings to market. And so we did that about 4 years ago, and we're have a second product out now. And so that's kind of the genesis behind Kinetic Revolutions.
You mentioned the adjustable pylon, and a couple of weeks ago, we're sitting in the staff meeting here at De La Torre, and Drew hands me one of them, and I'm just kind of checking it out, and I'm playing with it, he told me where it came from, and I said, this is genius. Because I was sitting, I wasn't mad. I don't want to say like I wasn't mad, but I was just like kind of racking my brain. I'm like, I wish I had this when I was in therapy, because I can't tell you the number of times I'd be in, especially inpatient physical therapy, and it'd be like, oh, let's put a little wedge in your shoe because until the prosthetist gets here. And I'm like, man, if we'd have had this thing, it would have just been a couple of seconds to adjust, and it'd have been fine.
Right. Well, I'm glad that you found it useful, or would have found it useful.
Yeah. It really is. So it was really exciting to see that's that's out there and that's available for people, because I think it's just going to make a tremendous difference. I know sometimes in outpatient therapy, even the therapist would she would call one of the prosthetists here and be like, "Hey, if you're in the area, can you stop over? Brian needs an adjustment, whatever." And this way, it just changes everything, and it really makes things a lot better for amputees going forward, I think.
Yeah, I think it does solve a problem, and I think our biggest challenge for Kinetic Revolutions right now is it's an education approach. Because there's prosthetists out there who will say, well, I didn't know it was for definitive use. I thought it was just for use in my office to determine the height. And then I go back to the old way and put the old pylon in. And we say, no, it can be left in the prosthesis, and you just have to pay attention to the weight requirements and things like this. So I think our challenge is increasing the number of people who are aware of it. And so we are certainly exploring our options for distribution and how what are the ways that we can increase the usage, and not just for us to benefit, but we truly feel the mission of this is that there are patients out there that just changing shoes for the day. You're in sneakers or tennis shoes, and then you want to put on sandals, and you lose a half an inch right there. Well, if you had your pylon, you could take care of that. So, there's work to be done there. So we'll keep you posted on it.
Absolutely. So the other day, I was sitting in Joyce's office talking to her about interviewing you, and for better or for worse, I fully vet every guest that I have on Amp Life. And I was sharing with her, some of the things that I've learned. And I made the comment that Ability P&O is ahead of the curve. And she agreed with me. But I've been so impressed with what I've learned about the company, not only from just a vetting process for this interview, but also from following Ability on social media. And so I want to ask you about a few of the things that I see that you're doing at Ability. I thought that it was super cool that you had clinicians at your York, Pennsylvania location who recently participated with an elementary school's annual career fair. And, you've talked about the importance of education, but specifically, how important do you feel it is for education on that level? Because I can tell you, when I was in elementary school, middle school, junior high, and they had career fairs, a prosthetist never showed up. That just never happened. So how important is it for you to have these opportunities to do this?
So again, for me, it will always be important to provide education, and folks may be able to say, well, elementary versus middle versus high school. I'm very much a believer that part of what the small chip on your shoulder, so to speak, right? And it's a positive chip, is to share with as many people as we can what it is that we do. Because when I found the profession and the friends and colleagues that I have become close to around that same time, who also sort of stumbled into the profession, it was always curious to me why people were just falling into this and not choosing it. And so for me, one of my residency research projects that I did when I was doing one of the two residencies is I put a plan together and then went to a high school, middle school back in my local community where I grew up, and I presented the profession to multiple physics classes. We used physics class as a way to touch everybody through that school day. But anyway, and then the idea was that all the information that I was leaving behind would be, at that time, it was 2000, right? 2001. High schools still had, big file cabinets of, career folders, right? And the goal was to basically penetrate and get a column, get a row in that file cabinet for prosthetics and orthotics, so that if you had a high school sophomore or junior who was coming down, meeting with, in a very traditional way, meeting with a guidance counselor to say, hey, these are my interests, what do you have? That, someone could actually pull out the P&O folder, and you could have students that would pick to go to school for this, and not just happen chance. Oh, I went to school for PT, and then I went to volunteer at a P&O facility, and I jumped into P&O versus therapy because I didn't know about P&O, or not that knowing about P&O through a family member is a bad way to enter the field. That's perfectly fine.
Right.
But my goal was always to increase the number of people thinking about O&P and bringing minds to P&O who weren't necessarily raised in it, right? So it's sort of a fresh perspective approach. The more people that we can get exposed to it, thinking about it, biomechanically, it's got a lot to offer. The devices are changing. They're more advanced. Many of the devices that we adjust now on patients, we're doing it with, through Bluetooth when they're in the office. There's activity monitoring that can go on where, I prefer to not look at it as Big Brother, but I look at it as like, if you're an amputee and I can collect some real-time data on you, I may be able to thwart your next visit by texting you or something, or sending you a memo saying, hey, I'm getting red flashing lights, on my phone here, and you've been hiking for 10 hours, let's, here's some suggestions around that. And you're like, oh, wow, I never thought of that. True. I should ice the leg tonight, or, whatever. I'm hypothetically, but the point is to start to expose folks at whatever age to say, you can do this as a career, and it can't be outsourced overseas, right?
Right.
You have to still treat a patient face to face. And while we may have some telemedicine advances in O&P, for the moment, the bulk of the care is still provided, in a face to face setting, and then also just to expose folks in general to disabilities and the sensitization around. I did a talk one time to a fourth grade class, I think, and kids are innocent, they're beautiful, they ask great questions, they're direct, and I'd like to think that the 30 kids, there was a kid in that class that had lost his leg from a lawnmower accident, and those kids may not remember that, but in the moment and in the time frame leading up to and beyond the talk, that talk had an impact on the teachers. It had an impact on the principals. I mean, it doesn't just touch the kids. There's also adults that are on the peripheral of these talks that are affected by what we say and what we do. So anyway, that's probably the best way to answer that. Is it's sort of a near and dear kind of a thing. And along with this, you have to understand too, it's about our practices being part of communities. Because for years, my observation was that O&P companies' practices are in communities, but they're they could be more stuck in, if you will, and they could give back more. After all, we are servicing this patient population in that community. So if there's a race, if there's a dance, if there's a function, something going on, an MS walk or a trisomy 21 run or what have you, you probably ought to be involved in it, because those same folks are spending their dollars at your facility. And so you have to have some social responsibility. You can be for profit and in it to win it, but still have very much of a recognition of your social obligation as well.
Sure, absolutely. So, along with that, the other thing on the educational end that I saw was that you had some of your patients actually go to a middle school and speak to 900 middle school students. How is that experience, not only for the patients, but do you find that the kids are receptive and eager to learn?
Right. So I wasn't personally there myself, but absolutely the feedback from that event was off the charts. And I think one of the sometimes when you do these events, there's unintended positive consequences or outreach from these events that you never anticipate. And in this one, the one gentleman who we can fact check his age, but I think he was around 10, if not maybe 10 or 12. But we had a patient who was younger who had been having some difficulty with his own amputation in terms of psychosocially and just adjusting and, decreasing confidence and just kind of in his shell, rightfully so, and working through the steps of healing, really. And this young man agreed to speak at that event, and he had to do the talk 3 times. And the first group, he didn't really want anything to do with the microphone. The second group, he kind of came out of his shell. And then by the third group that came into the gymnasium, none of the other adult amputees that were there could get the microphone out of his hands. So by the third cycle of students, this kid had kind of found himself again, so to speak. So, hey, if this doing this provided this young man with a chance to kind of feel like himself again and start to get comfortable with, potentially a new platform that he'd been given in life to do something positive with, he kind of started to find it. And that was, so we all, the folks, that office, the staff from that office, as they left that event, they were kind of like, wow, who knew that was going to come out of this, right? And so again, I think it just is another example of when you reach out like that, we're throwing a lot of darts, and if you throw 50 darts and 3 stick, that's a good day. You don't have to stick 48 darts.
Right. Absolutely.
And we also had Clemson University at that. There were researchers from Clemson who we partner with on a couple projects, but we had some folks from the engineering department at Clemson attended that event as well. And so it was really neat to link kind of patient practitioner research all back in a forum where we could demonstrate to students, here's sort of O&P in a capsule for you today. So very exciting. Thanks for asking about that.
Sure, absolutely. So quality patient care is something that's extremely important to me, especially because I'm an amputee. I'm constantly looking for ideas and drawing from my own experience and the experience of other amputees that I talk to on how I would like to see patient care improved. And I know that some members of the Ability team recently met with Freedom Innovations to work to develop some research initiatives to help improve patient care. What are some of the ways that you would like to see patient care improved, not just at Ability, but within the entire spectrum of the O&P industry?
Right. So this was a very exciting meeting and has been a great relationship over the last probably 10 years. and we've grown closer with Freedom. And I think, we're involved right now. We're just concluding a research, an N equals 30, and that's number equals 30 patients. We had a 30 patient, research study that we were hired by Freedom Innovations to conduct, surrounding the release of a new product, a foot product that they have. And so it's a comparative effectiveness study that they hired us to provide. So, we got the IRB approvals and, the highest level study design you could provide, we provided. And we're concluding that study, and we've submitted the manuscript for a peer-reviewed journal article. So we're very excited about that. And that has led to this idea of, okay, well, maybe with some of these manufacturers, if payers want documentation and they want proof that products are different and that products work and actually, help the functional level of a patient, and outcomes that patients are using these devices. So, we have to get away from the anecdotal, well, so-and-so goes to the grocery store. We have to sort of pick that trip apart to the grocery store and figure out how many steps it is and figure out if there's any curbs involved and what does the driving consist of going to the store. So, what we're seeing more and more is manufacturers in general are interested in really working with you before they even release the product. As they're beginning to design and think about new products, it's the stop and pause and say, well, wait a minute, let's get some patients, let's get some premier, leaders in patient care, provider companies in and talk about these things. And not that they haven't tried that in the past in terms of, but it's, again, as the industry's changing, a lot of times a manufacturer may have an amputee on staff. And so they run the idea past the amputee, and that amputee says, hey, it looks good to me. And you're going, well, that's only one patient, that's only one person, and they work for the company. So what are they going to say?
Right.
So, and I think even just historically, there's pretty low barriers to entry with the P&O market from a product side. So a lot of times you have a manufacturer comes out with a new knee or new foot. They're friendly with a couple facilities, and they just, they give a couple feet away to a couple facilities, and they would say, well, try these on your next two patients and let me know what you think. Well, that's a little too open-ended, right? And it's highly subjective.
Right.
And many times those manufacturers were receiving feedback that was more about the practitioner's impression of the product and not really about the patient's feedback. And so I think we're getting better at partnering earlier in the design and development phase of the products. And so for me, I think that's when you talk about, how do you improve patient care? There's always going to be the customer service side of patient care where we can create, we can talk to patients differently. We can make sure that they have an iPad in the room, and we can show them sites. And so there's always going to be evolution that way. But I think the way we improve patient care, and at least through the products, is going to be being prepared, better prepared earlier in the process when we start fitting these devices, so that when the insurance company says, do you have any proof that that's better? You can say, you know what? Absolutely. I have 3 papers that have been done on this product already. Let me send them to you. And then you hope that we can, at some point, get more of a sit down with payers to say, this does improve patient care. And we've also, substantiated, backed it up through these research claims. So.
Sure. So
Yep.
One of the things I know that patients are often conditioned to expect the provider to enhance the quality of services offered. However, I believe that the patient has a vital role to play in the quality of the care that they receive. How can patients take a more proactive approach in helping improve the quality of the care they receive? Well, the number one thing can be that we need to educate our patients that self-advocacy on their part is critical. Until we do get the whole
car greased, right? And it's not just the squeaky wheel. That's an idealistic view, and we're headed towards that hopefully. But until we get there, it's patient self-advocacy. It's the first time I'm with a patient in my office or in the hospital or whenever, it's really having a general overarching conversation about the type of relationship that is potentially upon us should the patient choose to come to deletory or ability or hanger or whoever. There has to be some conversation about the patient's participation in the whole process. So it isn't just, I'm going to give you all these products, shake your hand, wave goodbye, and you're going to go climb Mount Everest, or you're going to start biking again. So I think first and foremost would be self-advocacy. And what does that mean? It could mean calling your insurance company, right? It could mean putting the time in to understand how your insurance pays a claim and why we can only get a liner covered every 6 months, right? So it's really just a commitment to educate the patient's commitment to educate themselves and come along for the ride. It can't just be a one-sided type of I would call it a transactional relationship. It can't. It's probably not going to go well, and I think arguably the outcome is not going to be as good if it's more of a give and receive. And I would also say some of the work we've done with the Patient Advocacy Council in the last year, those patients have pointed out to us just making sure that the incentives are aligned, and when I say incentives, it means it's more that I take the time to find out what makes you tick as a patient, because you could care less maybe about if the room is nice or not, right? You may have other things that you need to be incented for to participate, right? Or that key buttons I need to push, right, to understand what's gonna help you come back to the next appointment. And be on time and not miss appointments, because, when a patient misses appointments and they are saying they need an adjustment, it creates gray area there then, right? It's like, wow, I'm trying to service this patient, but they keep missing appointments. So, should I have a cab? Should I get a cab to come to their house, or Uber, or so again, I think it's been helpful for us to start to maybe identify some of better ways that we can engage the patient so that we're hitting on their incentives and not always ours, and just sort of rote preaching to the patient. Well, here's what we're going to do. And then when the patient just doesn't say, okay, we get all flustered. Like, wait a minute. Well, maybe this guy likes orange and not blue, So that's what I would say on that front.
So as I was reading the summer edition of Life Enhanced last night, I discovered first that on page 3, there's a picture of you, Joyce, and I from the policy forum in DC this year. But the publication is extremely well done. Tell me about Life Enhanced. How did you guys decide that that would be a vehicle for you?
Well, I'll tell you, I'm glad you're reading it. First, it was, I think we started Life Enhanced in maybe 2012 or 2013. And this for me was something that, again, when you're trying to differentiate yourself in the profession, and as I said before, we pretty much lean forward, and we're always trying to innovate and create. And I think for me, it was about not wanting to just send newsletters and not wanting to send, while we do send e-blasts or constant contacts and things, one-pagers I would call them. We do that, and it has its place. I always sort of viewed what was available out there that other companies were doing was more newslettery, so to speak. And I wanted to really come up with something that was substantial, that wasn't just a page or two, that would be beneficial to patients, to payers, referrals, PTs, doctors, case managers, and then that also would encompass our offices and all the different sort of the cultural differences in the regions where we practice and feature new employees, new practitioners, things like that, so that if any office picked this issue up, and the issue you just read, that if someone picked that up in Charlotte, there would be something in there for someone in Charlotte. And if someone opened it up in central Pennsylvania in our Mechanicsburg office, they would open it up and they would find something that that was maybe not Harrisburg, but it was South Central Pennsylvania related. So that was really how it was born. And the idea was, put practitioners, put patients and practitioners on the cover, so that would give, we publish it 4 times a year, and in my mind, it's 4 times a year that there's something new and different. So whether it's the patient craving that, or it's the practitioner craving a new piece of sort of collateral marketing type piece to take out and show to a referral or a patient, that they would have that available to them. And there's been countless times in the last 4 years where, practitioners are like, shoot me a quick email and say like, this is amazing. I love that we do Life Enhance because my patient just asked about X and I went and grabbed a Life Enhance and folded it to that page and, and showed it to them in the room. So of all the marketing pieces and things we do, with social media now where people just sort of read something and it's done five seconds later, this seems to have found its place where, it kind of can live for 3 months. And I think our patients still, from the data we're receiving, a lot of our patients are still print oriented. So I think it's still wise to have something that people can turn the pages and feel it. But yeah, we're very proud, and we've added staff in the last year and a half that helps us tremendously. Katie Colson, who works at Ability on the marketing side, has been a tremendous help in taking over a lot of the lead of Life Enhance. So along with her being involved with Life Enhance and some of our social media initiatives, Katie, along with our COO, Kathleen DeLawrence, they've brought a really refreshing improvement to Life Enhanced and kind of have kept it consistent with our brand and very well-rounded, from the planning meetings to the final, publication and distribution of it. So it's very exciting. Manufacturers contribute advertising revenue to that magazine, and so that helps us keep the price affordable for a smaller company to be able to produce something like that. So we're grateful to our manufacturers who support that. And we don't just let any of them in. We're as you can probably imagine, we're pretty discerning about making sure that the magazine is about patients and practitioners and not about pages and pages of who's selling the best foot, right?
Right.
So as I said, it's got to be patient first, right? The minute we lose ourselves that way, we've lost ourselves. So
yeah, you're absolutely right, Jeff. And I cannot say enough good things about Life Enhanced. I was looking at it last night, and my wife's probably like, what the heck? Because I told her, I said, oh my goodness. I said, they have ads in here. And, most people don't want to see ads, but I'm just like, they're obviously I have a different perspective than the average amputee working for an O&P company and doing the podcast. But, I was just so impressed with how well done it is. And I picked up, you mentioned about not having pages and pages of who's selling, the next new foot or whatever. And I was somewhere the other day, I don't remember where it was, but I was somewhere the other day and I saw an O&P publication and I picked it up, and that's all it was. There might have been one story, but even that one story was still leaning toward a specific company to sell a specific product. And right. I'm like, it was nice because I had to wait and my phone was nearly dead. So it gave me something to do, but I'm just like, otherwise I would not look at this thing. I'm just like, that's a waste of my time. Cause
well, hopefully you see yourself in these issues and you can relate to either, yes, I've been there and seen that, or you look at it and you think, wow, I never thought about that before. Maybe that's something I should get involved in your hometown,
Right.
So if it's inspiring in any way, we've met our objective.
Well, it definitely was. So yeah, you've met the objective there. Absolutely. So, you've mentioned a couple of times, the Patient Advisory Council, and I was scrolling through Facebook about a month ago, I guess it was, and I came across a post on Ability's Facebook page. And I was really excited to discover that you'd started this patient advisory council. And the first thing I did was I shared the post on my Facebook, and I added, my comment into that. And I said, every O&P company should be doing this. So I recognize, what you were doing with that. How did the patient advisory council come about?
So this has been going in the planning stages for on and off for the last 2 years. And in the last year, we were able to finally put some teeth to this and really start to profile out the types of people that we wanted to be part of this council. And they'll serve, I think, a 2-year term, or it's either a 1 or a 2-year term. I can clarify. But, the idea was to make sure that you had representation from amputees that were below knee, above knee, upper extremity, and then on the orthotic side, the parent of a pediatric brace wearer or helmet wearer, possibly even an adolescent representative, whether they were PRO, it didn't matter. But just, again, set out with the idea to profile a group of patients that we could approach, and then, manage the mechanics of how do we get them to a common meeting place, 3-4 times a year. We have the delight of working with Ed Nathan, who is he has background from the pharmaceutical industry, but he received an amputation a couple years ago and found his way to Ability. And the more we got to know Ed, much like your growing relationship with Delatorre, we started to learn more about Ed's background and his corporate training skills. And, so there was a hit on a lot of levels there. And we brought this idea to Ed, and he said, this would be great. And I think I could help you execute on the vision of having a group like this. So we've had 2 meetings. We're having a 3rd in August. And what we set out to do was, we're big enough now, and you probably could do it with a smaller entity, but we felt like we were big enough now that we really needed some critical feedback, and we didn't need yes people in the Room. We don't want patients who just want to tell us what we want to hear.
Right.
We really need patients who, we have one patient on it that's, was borderline leaving the practice at one point and was able to reveal her reasons for wanting to do that, kind of her innermost vulnerabilities about that. And she didn't leave the practice, and it was, you learn through happen chance that she didn't leave. And when you hear those stories, you look back to your processes and your protocols and say, well, what can we be doing? And so I personally have found these meetings transformative for me because, there's all this other things you have to be concerned about running a company. But at the end of the day, the lists that these patients through these meetings, the lists that these patients are generating, is there anything else that you need to really study? I mean, they're giving you the answers. They're telling you exactly what they want to see. So, I mean, we've had recommendations for get rid of the televisions, TVs in waiting rooms. One of Ability's big themes is you don't wait in the waiting room more than 3 minutes because we don't overbook. We don't double book like physicians. So if you come into an Ability office, you check in, and now the PCC is coming around to the front and sitting down with the patient with an iPad, and we're filling out some outcomes, a subjective outcome measure that we administer to patients. So if you think about it, why did we have TVs in the waiting areas? Well, because 13 years ago, we put a TV in there because I was trying to provide accommodating type atmosphere, and I would put on the channel the patient wanted, and and I would go back in the lab and do something for 10 minutes, and then I'd come put the patient in a room and what have you. So it's one of these things that patients kind of said, well, unless you're going to put programming on it that kind of shows new device types and sort of P&O relevant content, I don't necessarily want to sit there for a minute or two and hear, the latest talk show on. So I think getting feedback like that, some of our offices are not kid friendly enough. There's not enough elementary school type age things in the waiting area. We've had requests to have more time spent talking about the device warranty, because a lot of times we just, the device warranty details are kind of on a packet of papers that are given at the front desk. And well, maybe the practitioner concludes the visit with 1 minute at the end spent on going over the device warranty, because some folks don't even care about it. But you know what? The ones that do would appreciate that minute or 2 minutes of detailed explanation.
Right.
So, so we're really kind of and what we started to do after the first, so we had the first meeting back in March, we had the second meeting, and what we did at the second meeting is we had a structure for the first meeting that was a lot of based on introduction and telling stories. And then the second meeting, we set into what will be like a 4-meeting series where we laid out the process to our patients of how, it reminds me of like how a bill becomes a law, right? It's like how does a brace, or limb get made? I mean, I don't literally mean just a fab part. It's right. You come in and you have a prescription for a limb. And did you ever think that there's the evaluation? Well, of course, the patient's front and center for that step. But then what about the authorization phase? And then the patient says to us in the second meeting, well, we don't really know anything about the auth phase. We gave you our insurance card and you called us 2 weeks later and said it was approved. And so we're gonna put some transparency to that and then let them ask questions. And so this last meeting, we got as far as the evaluation, and hearing what the evaluation was like from their filter, from their perspective. So the practitioners that are part of this meeting and myself and Kathleen, we just listened. We didn't say anything to try to change anybody's perception of an evaluation at Ability. We just let them talk and share their experiences. And then the next couple meetings, we're going to do deeper dives into the auth, the delivery of the device, the follow-up, and us chasing a claim for 6 months and how patients can be more active in that part. Because many times we have really good outcomes, and then we try to get paid for the next 4 months. Well, sometimes patients are aware of that, and sometimes they're not. So anyway, that in kind of in a nutshell, that would be the PAC, the advisory council formation and what we hope to get out of it. And believe me, the things that have come from the first 2 meetings have been, as I said, transformative for me and how I think about patient care. It's changed. We have a website that we're rebranding and redeveloping right now, which we're going to be launching in September. And these first 2 meetings have even impacted content for the website. And some of these people are going to be part of a website in internal reveal and sort of a functionality test. Some of those patients are going to be part of this because at this point, there is no reason in the life of Ability to not have a 62-year-old man who's a baloney amputee sitting in that room trying the website before it's live. Because that's exactly who I need to test the site.
Right, absolutely.
And I need a 26-year-old and I need a 80-year-old. We got all that covered. But my point is, we need a user.
I've been talking with Jeff Brandt, the founder and CEO of Ability Prosthetics and Orthotics. For more information about Ability, visit www.abilitypo.com, and you can connect with them on Twitter and Facebook at AbilityPO, and on Instagram at ability_PO. For more information about Kinetic Revolutions, visit www.kineticrevo.com, and you can connect with them on Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram at Kinetic Revo. Jeff, thanks for joining me today on Amp Life. It has been an absolute pleasure.
Brian, you're welcome, and thank you very much for asking me on. I really appreciate it, and I hope folks find it helpful.
Absolutely. Thank you. You've been listening to Amp Life, the #1 podcast for amputees, hosted by an amputee, and brought to you by Dilatory Orthotics and Prosthetics, located in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. If you enjoyed today's episode, leave us a review on iTunes or give us a like on Facebook. I'm the Brian Moe. I invite you to visit our website, www.amplifepodcast.com, or check us out on Facebook at Amp Life Podcast.